Hello everyone and welcome to People Analytics Live. I'm here with Vladimir Sterngold. Vlad, very nice to have you.
Thank you for having me. Really great to be here.
Thank you very much. You're a People Analytics leader at Booking.com, right?
Yes, that's correct. I've been with the company for the last 7 years. I've been in the different positions, product management. Last 6 years, I got into data and analytics. And last year, around September, I moved into HR analytics and research.
Fantastic. So when you think about HR analytics, what comes to mind? What does HR analytics mean to you and why is it important for the organization, for the business?
Yeah, maybe one small correction. I think a lot of people know the term HR, but I think what people use, and I think I agree with it, is more people analytics. I like the word people. It tells basically what you're doing. And the same way in front says customer service analytics, every analytics explain what they're doing. And I think if you say people analytics, that makes more sense. So basically, that's the first thing. It has an element of HR, which is the operational one, which to me is basically allow any company to function, because a lot of the basic process in the company start budgeting, FT planning, which basically means how many people you have, where they are, how much they work, are they sick, are they at the workplace. All this is managed by HR analytics, or at least they provide the data so other teams can do well and prepare their budgets, forecastings, and so on. So there's a operational basic element. And I think the other one, when it comes to more people analytics, research, everything else comes to really, okay, how do we improve the workplace? What does it mean to be a good employee? What does it mean to be a good manager? How do I use all the data that I have that I can answer very deep, tough questions of really, how do I understand the emotions of the employees, of the people that come to work every day, right? Yeah. We could have a very well-functioning company with a very good, budget and forecasting element. But if we don't put efforts to make people analytics work, I don't think that will be the really best place to work for. Or we'll be missing so many clues to improve how people work, because people think I just come to do my job and get my salary, but there is so much around it. How do I spend my time? Can I get more time? Can I get time for learning? There's so many elements around the employees, the people that work here. So I think those are the two things that HR and people analytics are basically doing. Get the basic right, and then make the workplace the best one to work for.
Fantastic. Well, I think you already mentioned maybe 10 or 15 topics that we can dive into. We won't dive into all of them because that will take us quite some time, but it would be very exciting. Let's just start at something tangible, something that you started or something that you did at Booking.com. Can you tell us something about first of all, the journey that you went through in people analytics?
I think that was a journey that I've been taking in this company for many years. I think I always like to go somewhere that I can learn something, but at the same time that I have a real impact on the business. It always starts with having an impact, right? You come somewhere, people say, I want to learn, we are all curious, but I think ultimately goes to that, do you have an impact on the business? So I've been picking different areas of the business which I wanted to learn for it, but as well use my knowledge around management, around data, around numbers. So I think HR analytics and the people analytics, when this opportunity came, I said, why not? I love a lot things around workforce management, which is a known term, and basically how you use your people in the best possible way. Yeah. But at the same time, I said there's going to be a lot of research element of really understanding the people, like people research, employee research, things that are what makes people engage. We don't go in a room and ask people, hey, how you engage? We ask them, do you get enough trainings? Do you get enough feedback? Is your manager good? How do you define a good manager? And I felt this will be a very interesting area for me to learn and to really develop within the company. But ultimately, I started as being my summer job at Booking 7 years ago. Booking was still not so well known, and I was looking for a job immediately after my graduation and master, and I was thinking, well, why not? I don't know much about this company, but the job, it's easy because I started in the translation department, managing one of the languages. We have done 42 languages, all the translations, and making it localized. And I thought I'm going to do 3 months and then I'll find something proper. Even my father used to ask me when I'm going to get a real job. Because for him, websites are basically a few guys who go somewhere in the basement, thinking of the great next thing. But hey, I'm 7 years still here, and I still love it, and I still think it's amazing. And it's amazing to see a grow of a company from a real hungry startup to a big company, but still hungry, still interested, still wants to do the best for the customer, makes them really explore the world.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and it's funny that you say that, because I see a lot of startups that are starting to scale up. So they started a few years ago. They have a few hundred employees now, and it's either the very big corporates that are looking into people analytics, or those very fast growing scale ups. And it's funny that you say the thing about Booking.com. At which point do you think, or at which point did it really get started to? Because you start with data-driven HR or just your basic metrics, and then at some point you start going into analytics. At what point did that happen for you in the organization?
I think we've always been behind saying we're data-driven among some of our most important values. Do the right things today and don't let your work for tomorrow, because tomorrow there'll be a fresh one. Everything about the customer. And I think we've always been doing that one. And just recognizing that, you're data-driven means that a lot of people, and luckily I think we've been always aiming to get people that not necessarily always come up with the great solutions or just with solutions, but people actually that come with the great questions, why are we doing what are we doing? What if we do this and that? So I think if you start with this kind of people having next to you, I think makes your work much more easier, especially in my world of the data, because a lot of people either recognize it, either don't, not necessarily. They come with a solution and they want you to fit your data to their solution to prove that it's right. But I think it's part of our being humble is to say, I don't know what's the right answer, but I really want to think with you, what's the problem? It's like, do I really understand the problem? And then I would try things. I'm going to fail 9 out of 10 times, but I'm going to learn so much that when I do the right thing, it will be really what people are looking for. And it doesn't matter if it's your customer, if it's your partner, meaning the hotels that you work with or actually your employees. It's the same thing.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. So take us. You're saying you started 7 years ago. It's a long journey all the way till now, and there's probably a lot that happened in the meantime, including the growth of the company, of course. So take us through some of the important milestones you see in becoming as data driven as you are now.
There is no one big revelation there. It's a hard work every day and really trusting your people and making sure that you always approach every problem with why and what if. So I think the milestone's been, we've set up a very strong online experimentation where we could just basically test every part of the website. But we never said, okay, we've said it once and that's the holy grail of everything. We've been challenging since day one that too and how the experimentation is done at Booking and really trying to democratize that every new team, and you start with 10 product teams, you have 100, 150 that every team can test, learn, fail, learn again, and really get the right solution there. So basically anybody can do a test, anybody can start. It's easy to start a test. If you prepare yourself, you can observe the results, if you understand the statistics behind. So I think that's one thing. Then realizing that experimentation is not just on front end. Experimentation can happen anywhere. It can happen in your customer service, can happen with your partners, can happen within the company as well. You have to, of course, know what does it mean to experiment with, let's say, calls of agents, or what's the experimentation on a website. Those are two different things, but it starts with the same basics. Do you have a biased thinking, or actually you really think with problems, not with solutions? Yeah. Can you spot the bias, or can you not spot the bias? Do I understand statistics well, or can I hire people that really get statistics well to tell me what randomizations mean, what means to really focus on the right problem? So I think we always get this culture that we want to hire scientists and analysts. We started basically when the scientist title was not even existing, to basically hire people that should be curious, people that want to be closer to the business. They want to start with a smaller thing, smaller step, not necessarily the latest and greatest model that exists, but something that first works, gives you some learnings so you can build on it. I think that's another milestone. I think another milestone is really helping stakeholders to think not that they're going to have one great idea that's going to solve all the problems for the company, but really there is no one great idea. There's just many small steps, and as long as they're executed well, you learn from it, then you basically are building a whole journey. So there is never one great experiment, but there's just a line of experiments that you have to do. And once people start thinking like that, I think you're really on a great path.
Yeah, so the change in what you're saying is that the change in mindset, going towards that experimental mindset, being able to test things, to measure things accurately, that's really the way to go. That once you have the mentality, and as you said, you Booking.com is more data driven, so that might be then have been easier for you. Once you have that mindset, you can really make the steps, make the strides.
Yeah, to add to it, mindset means not only to be driven by data and experiments, but to know that you're gonna fail many times, because that's part of the whole things. But as long as you recognize this one and nothing wrong with it, your humbleness is basically super important. And I think this was been helping us, that people would always say, okay, let's look at the data. But again, it's very careful not to become data an excuse of not doing anything. So where is the data? I don't see the data, so we don't doing anything. The thing is, I always say to my team, look, people that are on management positions where they take decisions, they will take a decision regardless of anything. They're there to take decisions, their job to drive the business. That's what they have to do. My thing is, I want them to take a decision with our data. So even if it's 1%, 10%, as much as possible, it's always better, of course, but I want them to use our data, right? Otherwise, they will take a decision. But if we have this understanding that they are willing to wait certain period that they could get this data and then have an informed decision, I think then you can go quite far.
Yeah. So, some data is absolutely better than no data, of course. And the more data, the better the decision. At least you hope in the end.
Paralyze. Just don't stop and think, okay, if there is no data, I can't start. Data can come in many different forms. And again, if you're able to really think of, hey, what's my problem, and define your problems, then you, at some point, you'll get the data. The problem is that people not always start with a well-defined problem, and then it's very difficult to get the data. There's a lot of confusion. Team can just work in a different, teams are not aligned. So start with the problem.
Yeah. No, and what you're saying about the data-driven mindset, and that mindset of experimentation, I think that's where a lot of, and you started off saying, hey, let's call it people analytics instead of HR analytics. I think that mindset is still lacking in a lot of HR, especially the corporate HR organizations, where that mindset of experimentation is still seen as a bit fringe, and bringing that mindset in, I think adds tremendous value. So fantastic to hear how you handled it. From during that process, the last 7 or so years, what are the biggest challenges that you've run into going towards an informed people analytics function?
Well, I would say on personal level, I think that it's always been myself, that I have to challenge myself to do better from yesterday and to really focus myself working on relevant problems. So that's something that I learn every day. And I think if you one day stop and think I'm not learning anything, then probably it's time to change. Mm-hmm. But that means as well, as I said, you have to be ready to fail. You have to be ready to accept that other people know much better than you. I think I always want to be in a room where I'm the least smart person. I like to have a lot of smart people around me that can help me think, because otherwise, if you think you're the smartest or you're the leader, you're the one, I think you're in the wrong room or you're not just doing right. And so that's my personal one. On a company level, I think the challenge is always when the company grows, of course, you bring new people in. So how do you really get these people? People come from a different experience. People come immediately after universities or after spending 20 years in some of the most amazing companies out there. But all of them need some way of being integrated in your company. And there is a lot of things of how to integrate this one, how to basically keep your own culture as a company, but at the same time, enhance that culture, which means certain change needs to happen. So I think that's a big challenge that I don't think anybody has figured out how to do well, but we're still trying and finding the best ways there. Is basically keep our culture, keep enhancing it. Because at the end, the culture is not something that is out there that you read on a poster or something. That culture is basically what defines you. People see you and say, yeah, that's what I believe in. That's what, I come in the morning, have a coffee and what I work for. And why not? You spend so much time at work. So I think it's important part as well of your business life. I think starting with why, it's always a difficult one. I think you always know that sometimes you're going to have a tough conversations with people who already have a solution. Yeah. Because even if that's the right solution, I'm not saying a lot of people have the right solution. It's always important people can reflect on it. How did they get to this solution? What the thinking behind it? So it means, are you ready to start with why, or are you ready to start with the solution? So I always get back to this one, that I try to help them understand that starting with why is to understand the process, because you're going to repeat this process afterwards as well. And then if you learn that why, you know you're going to fail much less because you define the right problems, you define them well, you'll be able to do scenarios, what if this, what if that. And but that's an ongoing process, and basically you should never feel like, oh, again I have to explain this one. No, it's an opportunity to learn something, to help the other party to get better.
Yeah, no, and what's interesting is that the method that you describe is a very, very entrepreneurial, a very agile way of thinking. It's a trying, a failing, trying, failing until you succeed, and then you learn, and you try and you fail again. And in startup land, there's the big term of failing forward. So you try to fail as soon as possible, so you learn from it and you can make a next step.
And again, you have to be careful. Failing means you need to know that you're learning from it, not just for the sake of failing. And then the other thing, agile, to me, agile is something that you have to put a thought about your problem, right? And that can take some time. Agile doesn't mean necessarily quick thinking and let's execute already. Things as well, let's figure out what the problem it is. Take some time to think well with it, because when the problem is well defined, then you start being agile, then being quick execution. Don't waste too much because you put a thinking there, right? I think somebody said it, I think it was Stephen King or somebody, writing a book is super easy. The problem is coming up with the right story. So I take that approach that, once you get the right story, then execute and be agile and move quickly.
Yeah. So how do you create leadership buy-in and leadership support for such an initiative?
That's a good question. I think, as everybody else, the leaders and the people that manage the company, drive the companies, they're curious people. They want to drive the business forwards, right? So you can always engage with them by telling them a story. Believe me, this will always work no matter what. Having a good story works, I would say, okay, let's put it 99% of the time. And that story could be with numbers, that story could be with words. That's why for me, focusing on, especially with people who just join our analytics science community, how you write emails. Sometimes people forget that even an email, it's a story, right? You can do it with 3 bullet points. They're well organized and simple to read, and you can already have a big impact. So yeah, communication is the first one. So that's a good way to engage, and it's a skill that you always learn. You never stop learning how to tell stories. The other one, I think, is something that nobody can take away from you, and especially when you work with the leadership, is show impact, show that you deliver, right? When you take on a project, it could be building a model for a chatbot. It could be an analysis. It could be simply organizing the data. Show that what you will do will have an impact. Show this impact and deliver, right? Because once you're seen like that, I think a lot of doors get open and a lot of people are willing to work with you because they just want to see, okay, that makes sense. We could partnership. We can work forward. And I think the important part is go in a mind to understand what the other person really wants to solve. I think sometimes, I don't know, maybe that's from myself learning is as an analyst, I know the data and I think that's the right solution. So here you go. Instead of listening, what's the problem of the stakeholder, which might be a completely different one, something that we need to address first. But basically, because we don't do that, we'll never get to the point that actually they're going to listen to what I have to say. So I think it's as well walking open-minded in a room, just listen what it is, try to understand, try to connect, try to address that emotion, what their problem it is, really try to help them maybe get there, and then start adding what you know, what your knowledge it is.
Yeah, fantastic.
It's not science. It's basically care as much as you can.
Yeah. So can you tell us? Well, we're in the trend of Stephen King quotes and storytelling. So I'm starting to like this more and more. Can you tell us a story about a project or transformation that stood out? What was the business problem? How did you go about it? How did you select the data? How did you come across your data definitions? And how did you in the end solve it? Or maybe you failed and you learned from it and you did it better next time. Can you tell us such a story?
Super good question. Maybe I can split into, there is a story, of course, but I think when I look at selecting data, using the data definitions and stuff, this to me is part of a much bigger story. This is almost something that you always have to keep going, right? Because for me, it always starts when I come to a new problem, new department, new data set or anything. I always ask myself, is that the lowest possible number that I see here? Is there any aggregation in this data? Where's this data coming from? Because if I can answer these simple questions, then I know we're not ready to use this data for a lot of our processes, optimization, analysis, and so on. Because you basically don't necessarily understand what goes into this average, what goes into that number. So for me, this is an ongoing process of always trying to get all your data, really understand where it's coming from, when it's failing, what are the assumptions in the data, what are you not collecting. One interesting thing being in people analytics is you should be super, super careful what you collect, because in every other place, let's say front-end analytics, you want to collect as much as you can so you can do better experiments, for example. And of course, within what is legal, what makes sense to be collected. But when you're in a people department, you always have to think, it's all my colleagues around me. It's me that we create the data. So I have to be above everything else of really careful what data we collect, how we use this data. Do we disclose? We should always disclose to our people that this data is going to be used for that model or this model. So I think this is an ongoing story that you have to do all the time. But then to an actual story. So I think a few years ago, we've been looking at our customer service centers and how people work there. And we're basically seeing that people were leaving, and we really had to improve the people stay, because it's a challenging work. It's an amazing one. I think I recommend to anybody to go and pick up a phone and speak to a customer and really try to solve a problem. And then you really realize how difficult it is. And there are many different ways of improving this one, right? Great lunches, you can always look at what people are paid and everything else. And there is always, you don't know what the right solution is there, right? Because there is always another company that maybe gives more or less, has a bigger name, better name, whatever it is. But I think one thing to realize by looking at a lot of different data sources, anything from what people, their productivity is, to what other external companies are doing, to basically what people tell us in their surveys and so on. But one thing that started to stood up was more the time that people use in a company for, let's say, breaks, for personal learning, development, and so on. And I think what we realize is that there is a huge opportunity that actually increase that time to make it more, basically give more time to people, which, if you think in business terms, costs money, right? Because every minute spent on anything else that is not your actual job is actually cost for the company. But if you don't do that, people will leave you. People won't stay with you, right? Because they want to develop, they want to grow, they want to, we spend so much time at work, as I already mentioned. Everybody does that. So it has to be a right balance of doing trainings and really doing your actual job. So basically what we did a business case for our CEO that we need to increase that time, that we need to give more time to our people. And that did really, really good for them, because we see really our main metrics around people really getting much better and improving. So I think is not always the solution is the first one that comes in mind. It's not always the one that everybody does. It's not always related to, very practical one. But sometimes you have to think, what do people value as well? So how do I measure time, and how much of that time I can give back? Should I give 1 extra hour, 2 extra hours? And then you can actually measure the impact of your main metrics. And that was super, super interesting.
Yeah. So how did you do that analysis? Did you have already certain standards, or did you run an experiment to see, hey, what happens? Did you use literature and come to an optimum? How do you measure, hey, if we give people a number of hours a week, free time or learning and development time, they'll actually stay? How do you test something like that?
Question, because what's the optimal of all these? I think you do all of that. So you definitely do a lot of reading, because there is the materials of like what's an optimal time to have per person, so they can per week have a normal functioning life in terms of learnings and doing other stuff besides their job. So there is a lot of learning about that. The other way is, of course, a lot of historical data. You basically look at periods where things were really, really, going bad, because there is always a crisis somewhere. There's always something happening in the world. So those things give you great opportunities to see what's your upper limit, to see how much people can, because when there is a crisis, everybody has to work, right? This is an amazing thing where you see the whole company jumping in, starting to help and everything else. But from an analytics perspective, this is a great opportunity as well to see what the trend tells you when it's super busy. And of course, you have periods where nothing is happening, right? But you can't just say, okay, everybody go home for now, right? So again, this gives you an opportunity to look at a lot of historical data and see what could be an optimal Very. And of course, the other thing is you always have people that you can ask them what they think of what they expect there. You can be in an big company, different offices. You can always set up experiments around people where they can see, okay, let's change how one team works compared to the other team. So when you combine these three resources together, I think you start having a meaningful picture there. And then, of course, you should not wait to have the perfect data set. Then where the business people who really understand the business sit together and say, okay, from all we have, what should be our proposal then? And then you make a proposal, you see if you get an approval, and then again, it's not just do it once. You test. Let's give plus 1 hour. Let's give plus 2 hours, and then measure your impact. See, did any of your metrics change? And if they didn't change, why didn't change? If they change, was it for better? Can you ask your people to tell you afterwards, hey, how do you perceive this change? So you always have to be, don't start with a clear idea what's your solution there. We didn't know at the time that we end up giving time back to people. But once we knew that this makes sense and it's a problem that we can solve, we did it. But then we never stopped testing afterwards what's the best one. Because there are different roles, different people in their stage of development. Some people just started, some people are more experienced. The outside world always changes, right? So there are different needs. So again, all this changes over time. But at least you find your baseline, and from there you can test and experiment constantly.
Yeah, fantastic. And one of the questions we get asked often is, hey, how do you then implement and create a certain urgency that the results are in the end implemented in the organization? What tips do you have for those people?
Well, as I said, work with your business, right? So I know that there are a lot of scientists, a lot of people who like to work on something close to like an academic paper, right? Somewhere in the corner, give you a solution and just throw it over the fence. I think it's important to realize that there is a time for such a work, but I think the important thing is from the beginning, get engaged with your stakeholders, right? Because first thing you discover, your stakeholders, the one that are the first line, already working on the ground with the people, they have a feeling what the problem it is. Sometimes it's real, sometimes it's fake, but it doesn't matter. They understand something that you don't know, right? So get engaged with them, listen to them. At the same time, invite them in your world to see that, hey, I'm going to use now historical data. Hey, series I did an analysis on how the trends from the past year are around, for example, time spent or the productivity of the people. Hey, here we see productivity in a busy time. Here you see productivity in a not so busy time. Once people start seeing this one, they're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Because, we as people see two things during the day and think, oh, there's so many problems. Although we had, let's say, 50 calls, but 2 of them were very bad, and I feel very bad about it. So I think, oh, everything was so bad. But actually, I had 48 calls that actually everything went so smooth, but I never focus on them, right? So engage with your stakeholders. Then make them as well understand what the problem it is. And I think never give them one golden solution. Tell them that this is going to be a step-by-step process where they will be involved into that one. Ask them along the way and engage them. Anybody from your CEO down to the agent that actually is going to be impacted by this one should receive a communication. This is what I call by transparency, or making the data, really democratizing the data so people can see it, check for themselves and like, okay, that makes sense. Because the other surprise you'll see, a lot of people, there will be people that will come up with a very interesting idea that you have never ever considered.
Yeah, fantastic. That's very interesting. Let's skip to the last question. What in your opinion does the future hold for people analytics? Especially want to focus on the role of emerging HR technology. What effect will that technology have on people analytics in the next few years?
That's a difficult question. Right?
I know.
And stuff. No, I always see the world like, at least for my personal, and again, this is something that evolves over time. But I think if you do the basics right, like at the end, people department and HR is about helping people to first, stay at their job, be good at their job, companies to function, to have alignment between departments, all that basic stuff, right? Which ultimately is a lot about people emotions and addressing those emotions the right way. It's hard work. And I think if you know how to do it right, if you have all these basics, then you can do a lot of stuff. Then it's not a problem to go and automate certain processes where, why would I need to, if I need to ask HR, can I now automate these tickets, for example, the questions of the people so they can find their solutions? Because I'm pretty sure this been asked last year as well. So there is a lot of things to automate. But then people wouldn't worry about, hey, the more you're automating, where's my job going? Actually, there's always been in the job for people, because you can be automating the more simpler things, the things where the machine can address the noise, but there are always going to be cases where you actually need a person to sit with another person and to have a conversation. I don't think the machine soon be having this kind of a thinking that they can address any small, nuanced thing that a person has as a problem. Mm-hmm. But if you set up right the basics and people know that I'm there to help you as a people department and people analytics, then you can do around automation, because we're definitely going into more and more automation in a proper way. I think there are so many processes coming in, companies are growing. I think you can do a lot there. But to me, it's basically, I can imagine an HR person having 3 or 4 chatbots, 2 or 3 recruitment robots, or whatever you call them, 2 or 3 answer machine or something on its disposal. They can do so much there. And if those machines do well, you basically, as a person, will always know, hey, this process can be fully automated. So here is an answer that came from an employee. Here is the automated answer. It's actually problems being solved. Or you can recognize, wow, okay, this is escalating. Actually, this employee had 2 questions in mind, and I can see something is going there. So actually, I need to go and talk to the employee. And this becomes a super powerful machine, because to have these robots or automation, whatever is at your disposal, means you need to get access to data. This data has to be in a way accessible to you that you can actually, use it to automate. And then you can always focus on your actual core job, is working with the people.
Yeah. Fantastic, and I think on that note we can conclude. Vlad, thank you very, very much. Very interesting conversation. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much for the invitation. It was really good talking to you, and I think as well along the way by talking, I as well, it's kind of interesting to build the story, because it's a never-ending story, right?